The words hung in the air, thick with a kind of smug finality I hadn't heard in years, not since that suffocating Christmas dinner when she'd casually announced she was managing my portion of Dad's meager life insurance. Honestly, she drawled, her voice like warm honey poured over ice, I just can't believe you didn't know. It's been right there, under your nose, all this time. She gestured vaguely towards the window, a dismissive sweep of her hand that encompassed my entire life. My perfectly ordinary, unremarkable life. Or so I'd thought. My normal was a carefully constructed equilibrium. A steady job in accounting, a quiet apartment overlooking a modest park, weekend visits to my aging mother, who lived just outside of town. My mother, Martha. She was the sun around which our small family orbited, her gentle presence a balm against the sharp edges of my older sister, Eleanor. Eleanor was the tornado, always swirling, always demanding attention, always a little too loud. She lived in a sprawling house inherited from our father, a house that felt perpetually too large for her and her perpetually absent husband. They had children, of course, but they were mostly grown and scattered, leaving Eleanor to fill the void with increasingly elaborate projects and a constant hum of dissatisfaction. We spoke on the phone a few times a week, the conversations a ritualistic dance of pleasantries punctuated by Eleanor's thinly veiled complaints about household expenses, property taxes, or the latest perceived slight from a distant relative. I'd listen, offer platitudes, and feel a familiar ache of weary resignation. It was the price of peace. There were the other times, too. Small things, insidious reminders of Eleanor's peculiar brand of generosity. Like the summer after college, when I was struggling to make rent. I'd mentioned it in passing to Mom, and a week later, a crisp $500 bill appeared in my mailbox, no note, no explanation, just a folded rectangle of green. Mom had looked bewildered when I asked, shaking her head. Not me, dear. I haven't had that kind of money in years. Later, I'd overheard Eleanor on the phone with a friend, boasting about how she'd loaned me the money, a loan I'd never been expected to repay, a loan that, in her retelling, had saved me from certain ruin. Or the antique armchair that had belonged to Grandma, a piece I'd always adored. One day, it was gone from Mom's living room. Eleanor had called, gushing about how she'd rescued it from the dust and damp of Mom's basement, how she was perfectly restoring it for me. It never arrived. Instead, I saw a photograph of it in an online furniture catalog, a slightly faded image that made my stomach clench. She was a master of benevolent appropriation, a magician of taking without asking, always framing it as an act of love or necessity. And then there was the persistent, almost theatrical, stress she always seemed to be under. The frantic calls about a leaking roof that turned out to be a dripping faucet, the desperate pleas for help with a major car repair that resolved itself overnight, the constant talk of financial precariousness that never seemed to translate into actual hardship. She lived in a large house, drove a new car, and took lavish vacations, yet she projected an aura of perpetual crisis, a damsel in distress forever on the brink of financial collapse. It was exhausting, this constant performance of struggle, but I'd learned to just nod, to offer whatever small comfort I could, to let her have her drama. It was easier than fighting. It was easier than the alternative. The incident, as it turned out, wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon, the kind that usually dissolved into the blur of spreadsheets and reheated leftovers. I'd gone to Mom's house to drop off some groceries. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-finished crossword puzzle in front of her, her brow furrowed in thought. The air was still, heavy with the scent of lavender and old paper. Eleanor was there, too, perched on the edge of a chair, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She looked uncharacteristically subdued, her usual effervescence replaced by a brittle tension. "You're here," Eleanor said, her voice flat. There was no warmth, no greeting. Just an observation. "Just dropping off some things for Mom," I replied, setting the bags on the counter. "How are you two?" Mom offered a weak smile. Eleanor didn't look up from her phone. "We're fine," Mom said, her voice a little too bright. "Eleanor was just telling me about some paperwork." "Paperwork," Eleanor echoed, finally glancing up. Her eyes, usually sharp and assessing, held a peculiar sheen. "Very important paperwork." I felt a prickle of unease. Eleanor's important paperwork usually involved some new scheme or an attempt to leverage family assets. "Everything all right?" I asked, turning to face her fully. She took a deep breath, a theatrical intake of air that made my shoulders tense. "You know," she began, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "that little cottage Dad left us? The one on the lake?" My mind flashed to a small, dilapidated structure, more of a shack than a cottage, that Dad had bought years ago on a whim. It was miles from anywhere, a place he'd tinkered with occasionally but never properly finished. I'd always assumed it was a forgotten asset, a relic of his more eccentric impulses. "The one that's practically falling down?" I asked, a little incredulously. Eleanor gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not quite falling down. Just neglected. Like some people." She held my gaze, and in that moment, I saw it. A flicker of something cold, something calculating, that I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge before. "Well," she continued, leaning back in her chair, her tone shifting, becoming almost conversational, "it turns out I've been paying the property taxes on it for the last 15 years. And the insurance. And handling all the upkeep. Even though it wasn't being used." I blinked. "You have? I didn't realize you were responsible for it." "Someone had to be," she said, a hint of martyrdom creeping into her voice. "And honestly, after Dad passed, nobody else seemed to care. Mom certainly didn't have the energy. And you, well, you were always so busy with your spreadsheets." She smiled again, a brittle, triumphant smile. "So, I took it upon myself. Managed it. Improved it. Made it habitable." The world tilted. I remembered a conversation years ago, just after Dad's death, when we were dividing up his few possessions. Eleanor had been insistent on keeping the cottage, claiming she had sentimental attachment to the place. I'd been overwhelmed with grief, and frankly, the idea of a rundown shack on a lake held no appeal. I'd agreed, thinking it was a harmless concession. "And you've been paying for it all this time?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The implications were starting to dawn, sharp and unwelcome. "Oh, yes," she confirmed, her voice laced with a manufactured weariness. "It's been a considerable expense, you can imagine. Especially with the market the way it is. So, I decided it was time to make it official. To consolidate." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a sheaf of papers, crisp and formal, bearing the letterhead of a local real estate attorney. She slid them across the table towards me. "This is a quitclaim deed," she announced, her voice gaining a new, hard edge. "It essentially transfers my ownership of the cottage, and all the improvements I've made, all the expenses I've incurred, solely to you." I stared at the papers, my vision blurring. My grandfather was my homeless neighbor. I never knew until he showed me. The title, a stark, blunt statement, echoed in my mind, a prelude to a reality I was only just beginning to grasp. "To me?" I managed, my voice choked. "Why? I don't understand." Eleanor let out a sigh, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Because, my dear brother," she said, her tone dripping with a condescension I'd never fully understood until this very moment, "you're the one with the stable job. You're the one who can afford the upkeep. You're the one who can handle the responsibilities. I've done my part. I've preserved it. Now it's your turn. Consider it your inheritance. A place to escape to, perhaps? Somewhere to reflect." She gestured to the deed again, her smile now triumphant and utterly devoid of warmth. "Sign it. It's already drafted. Just needs your signature. Then, it's all yours. Free and clear. No strings attached." The room felt suddenly cold, despite the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The scent of lavender seemed suffocating. Mom, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror, watched us both, her hand clutched to her chest. You're giving it to me?" I asked, my voice hollow. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. Eleanor, the perpetually struggling, the drama queen, the one who always needed something, was giving me something? Of course, she said, her voice smooth, practiced. It's only fair. After all, I've been carrying the burden for so long. It's only right that I pass it on to someone who can truly appreciate it. Someone who can make it shine. She paused, then added, her eyes glinting, and, of course, the outstanding property taxes and insurance premiums. Those will need to be settled immediately. But don't worry, I've already calculated them for you. They're on the attached addendum. The addendum. The final punchline. The debt. The responsibility. The burden. She wasn't giving me a gift. She was offloading her own carefully constructed financial entanglement onto me. The homeless neighbor wasn't some stranger, it was my own grandfather, and he had shown me the truth. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a strange, cold resolve. I picked up the papers. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the intent was clear. Eleanor, in her infinite wisdom and self-proclaimed magnanimity, had been maintaining a dilapidated property for 15 years, racking up bills, and was now transferring the entire financial liability, a liability she had never disclosed, never asked me to share, onto me. The gift was a poison chalice, a meticulously planned transfer of debt disguised as an act of familial generosity. She hadn't been struggling. She'd been investing, perhaps, or simply accumulating assets she couldn't manage or afford to maintain without help. And now, that help had a name, me. I looked at Eleanor. Her face was alight with a smug anticipation, the kind of satisfaction one gets after executing a perfectly executed maneuver. She expected me to balk, to protest, to lament the unfairness. She expected the usual drama, the usual guilt-tripping. She expected me to buckle. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply looked at the deed, then at Eleanor, and a quiet, chilling clarity washed over me. I understood. The homeless neighbor was not a metaphorical term, it was a factual description. And he had, in his own way, shown me the truth about my family. You know, I said, my voice unnervingly calm, cutting through the charged silence in the room, this is fascinating. Eleanor tilted her head, a flicker of impatience crossing her features. Is it? Then you'll sign it, won't you? Not so fast, I replied, my gaze now fixed on her. You mentioned you've been paying the property taxes and insurance for 15 years. That's right, she confirmed, a hint of pride in her tone. A significant investment. And you have receipts? Documentation? Her smile wavered slightly. Of course. I'm a very organized person. Excellent, I said, my voice picking up a subtle, steely edge. Because I'd like to see them. All of them. The tax statements, the insurance policies, proof of any repairs you've commissioned. Everything. And I'll need to verify the property's current assessed value and any outstanding liens. Eleanor's jaw tightened. That's unnecessary. It's a simple transfer. Not for me, I said, my gaze unwavering. I don't like surprises. Especially financial ones. And this is quite the surprise. So, before I sign anything, I need to conduct my due diligence. I'll be engaging my own legal counsel, of course, to review this deed and ensure all associated liabilities are clearly understood and transferred appropriately. The color drained from Eleanor's face. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawning, panicked realization. She wasn't in control anymore. The script had changed. But it's a gift, she stammered, her voice losing its practiced smoothness. You don't need to question it. It appears to be a transfer of a significant asset, with a substantial history of associated expenses, I corrected, my tone even. And I'm a meticulous accountant, Eleanor. I don't accept gifts without a full audit. So, if you'd be so kind, please provide me with all the relevant documentation. I'll be in touch with my lawyer. I stood up, the papers still in my hand. Mom looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and relief. Eleanor was frozen, her usual animated posture replaced by a rigid, disbelieving stance. "And one more thing," I added, a faint smile touching my lips. "You mentioned you've been paying the taxes and insurance. That means you've been claiming some kind of tax deduction or benefit for these expenses, haven't you? I'll need proof of that as well. For my records." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Her face was a roadmap of dawning horror. The confident manipulator, the master of emotional blackmail, had been caught in her own web. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated my quiet observation, my years of silent endurance, my methodical nature. She had thought I would simply sign, burdened by her fabricated crisis. I left Mom's house that afternoon, the deed tucked into my briefcase. The drive home was quiet, filled with the hum of the engine and the low thrum of a satisfaction that was both profound and chilling. The next few days were a blur of legal consultation. My lawyer, a shrewd woman who specialized in estate disputes, was initially skeptical, then intrigued, and finally, deeply impressed by the sheer audacity of Eleanor's scheme. We didn't need to engage in lengthy negotiations. Eleanor, faced with the prospect of a full forensic accounting of her 15 years of management, including potential tax fraud, and the undeniable evidence that she had attempted to offload a significant financial burden disguised as a gift, crumbled. The flying monkeys, as they often are in such situations, were quick to appear. My mother, bless her heart, tried to mediate, urging me to not this divide the family. Distant cousins, whom Eleanor had undoubtedly primed with her side of the story, sent me concerned texts, hinting that I was being unreasonable and unforgiving. Eleanor herself, initially defiant, quickly devolved into tearful pleas and accusations of betrayal, conveniently omitting the fact that her betrayal was her own meticulously planned deception. The quiet execution was not a single dramatic act, but a series of precise, measured steps. I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't threaten. I simply followed the paper trail. My lawyer drafted a counteroffer. Eleanor could have the cottage back, unburdened by any past expenses, provided she reimbursed me for my legal fees and signed a notarized statement acknowledging her attempt to transfer liabilities. The alternative, we politely suggested, was a formal investigation into the historical financial claims she'd made. Her response was swift and subdued. A curt email from her attorney, agreeing to all terms. The quitclaim deed was rescinded. The outstanding expenses, meticulously documented by my lawyer, were paid directly to the relevant authorities by Eleanor's estate. The cottage, once a symbol of her supposed financial strain, became a source of quiet, almost grim, satisfaction for me. It was a tangible reminder of the elaborate facade she had constructed, a facade that had finally, irrevocably, crumbled. The fallout was swift and silent. Eleanor, stripped of her power and her carefully cultivated victimhood, retreated. Her social media, once a constant stream of aspirational holidays and curated discontent, fell silent. Her phone calls to Mom became less frequent, tinged with a new, unfamiliar subservience. The family dynamics shifted, the unspoken tension between us now a palpable void. I never saw Eleanor again after that Tuesday. The realization of my grandfather's circumstances, the truth about his life and his passing, was a quiet revelation that had unfolded not in a dramatic confession, but in the sterile, impersonal language of legal documents and financial statements. He had been my homeless neighbor, a phantom in my periphery, a silent reminder of the complexities and hidden burdens people carry. And Eleanor, in her own misguided, manipulative way, had inadvertently shown me the truth. The satisfaction wasn't in her ruin, but in the quiet vindication of my own, long-held, unspoken observations. The world had reset, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a ledger being closed.